Alrighty. And we're on.
Great.
Mr. Scott Henderson, thank you for doing this. So for the
Thanks,
listeners,
Danny. Happy to be here, man. Thanks for
this,
having me on your show.
this is going to be the first non-video thing.
Oh, man. Will
But
people think that I'm crazy for not doing video?
no, people are going to think you're fine. And just to have you on is so amazing for me that I don't give a shit. We can even do it like, you know, etching on stone. I'd still do it.
Well, thanks, man. I'm just sorry. My video thing is just down. It's not
Totally cool.
Okay.
Dude, I've been a fan of yours since the day I started playing guitar.
Oh, my God. That's how
yeah.
young I am.
But really, it's really and you're an expensive guy to follow because I used to follow your online like gear blogs religiously and then spend thousands of dollars and then like I'd read it the month after and you just change your mind about something. You're like, oh fuck, I gotta sell all this shit now.
Oh my God.
But dude, so I want to talk like you started. You're from Florida originally, correct?
Mm-hmm. From Miami. Well, West Palm Beach.
West Palm Beach area. And you started your career there, and then you moved to the West Coast pretty early on, right?
Yeah, I moved here when I was about 23, 24 maybe. Yeah.
So how about we pick up like from there? What was like that? Like before that, I'm guessing like you were just doing the blues thing, rock thing, and studying jazz.
Bands in Florida, just trying to make a living, but like. There wasn't much work down there at the time. We're talking like during the disco era. So a lot of the music in the clubs was piped in and there wasn't much live band action. There just wasn't any work. Like there was a good music school down there, University of Miami, where Jocko went and Pat Metheny and a lot of Steve Morris, a lot of great players. But there's no work down there, so everybody just left and went elsewhere. And I don't know too many musicians down there working, even now.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. So what's first? Like what did you start doing?
What's that?
How did the career kind of start? What happened when you got to LA?
Well, I just did the same thing in LA for a couple of years, just tried to work in bands, playing covers and trying to make money. And I guess the major break that happened for me was when I was in going to GIT, I met Jeff Berlin. And Jeff Berlin asked me to play in his band and record on his first album. And that was the first time I was on an album. So because of that, I heard him play because of that record. And I started to get offers from other people like Donald and eventually Chick.
Yeah.
Those great musicians.
Yeah. Growing up in Israel, what record was very popular? Just you heard it a lot. The T. Levitz thing you guys did. The Players.
Oh, the Players record. Yeah.
That was everywhere in Israel.
Wow.
Like in the 90s. It's very like to me, when I moved to the States, I just you get a very different sense of who's famous and and how famous certain records are and what people know. And I remember walking to Berkeley just being shocked that not everybody like knew that record by heart. Because it was just so common knowledge there. So yeah, it was kind of a weird thing. So how did the Zawinul connection form for you?
Well, I've been a Weatherport fan forever, since my college days. So I think what happened, the way he heard me, was when Jocko left Weatherport. Joe was looking for a bass player, and he came to this club in LA called Dante's, which was at that time was the jazz club in Los Angeles, and everybody played there. And I was playing there with Jeff Berlin, and then Joe came to hear Jeff Berlin as a possible replacement for Jocko, and me there. And though he didn't hire Jeff, I guess he hired Victor Bailey, but he just remembered me, which was pretty flattering to me after that time he remembered me. And when it came time for him to form the Zawinul Syndicate, his tech called me because I knew his tech, Ralph Felton, was a good friend of mine. And he said, hey, Joe remembers you from way back years ago when he heard you play at Dante's with Jeff. Would you like to come in and just come down to Joe's house and play? And I was like, yeah, sure, man. Like I played with him. And
I guess I can squeeze that in.
Yeah.
Wow. So, there's something about your playing specifically that you don't really see with a lot of players, well, a lot of things, but the one thing that really mystified me listening to you throughout the years was this real shift that happened in your playing somewhere in the 90s, right? And it's almost like you went from like one version of yourself to a second phase, right? Where it's like the whammy stuff started emerging, the sound became non-digitalized, and
Yeah, I
like,
guess I just went back to a more vintage type of sound, probably because I got way back into blues. And I guess I did that Dog Party album, and I sort of fell in love with single coil pickups because, I mean, I started out playing single coil pickups when I was young. I didn't go to humbuckers until like the 80s when Tribal Tech did their first records. So I had been a single coil player ever since I started playing, Strats. And I just kind of, when I did Dog Party, I kind of fell in love with that single coil tone again and that more vintage tone. So I never went back to humbuckers and racks and all that stuff. I just started using Marshalls and pedals just like the old days.
mm. Was there something, because your playing seemed to have changed too, and you think it's just like the way that the touch of those guitars
Yeah,
kind of
it's the
influences
pickups.
the.
I mean, it's not a mid-rangey horn-like sound as much as it was with humbuckings. It's not it's closer to, like further away from the Holsworth type thing and closer to, like, for lack of better uh names, Jeff Beck, Richie Blackmore, high gained players that use single coil.
Yeah, it makes you touch the instrument a little bit
It
differently.
does make you touch and it's actually, in my opinion, it's a more full range tone and it's
Hmm.
more expressive. I kind of believe that the humbucking sound takes something away from the subtleties of the guitar.
Mm.
Uh, you know,
Yeah.
and especially if you're playing with high gain. If you're playing bluesy and you're playing with a clean tone, maybe not, because obviously, many people have played some very subtle stuff with humbuckers. But just in general, the when you touch the guitar, there's more dynamics. It's less compressed with single
Hmm.
coils. So the touch with your right hand becomes way more uh, varied, soft to
Hmm.
loud and less
Yeah,
compressed. And that makes for a lot of different tones.
sure. I mean, I
And
guess I
also,
never
I'm
really.
not just being stuck on the treble pickup all the time, but using the middle pickup and the neck pickup more. Um,
Mhm.
I think when I was playing with a humbucker, I don't think I ever took it off the treble pickup, very rarely.
Yeah, that's interesting. So when you found, like, when you were doing the big switch right around Dog Party, that certain areas of your vocabulary technically wouldn't work anymore.
Well, the legato thing doesn't work as well with single coil, so I'm imagining that my playing probably slowed down a little bit, which probably
Hmm.
made me think more about phrasing and less about playing fast.
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I'm kind of grateful for that because especially nowadays when just about everybody that's out there can play faster than me. So there's no reason for me to even consider myself a chops player. Back in the day when I was playing with Jeff Berlin and with Chick Corea, I was kind of considered like a guy with chops. But then
Yeah.
it's like Ingve and Eddie Van Halen came along and they made me look like a male. So by today's standards, I have literally no chops.
That's
Most
funny.
of my students can play faster than me. So, I just sort of concentrated on other stuff. Tone and phrasing became kind of my thing that I really wanted to get better at. I sort of gave up on trying to play faster because there's no way I'm going to compete with the amazing chops that are out there in the world today. Guitar.
Sure. Sure. Well, luckily, musical chops are going down at the same time, so you're safe. You're safe. We always in Marbin, we always call the new generation of player pajamas.
Uh, yeah,
Because they just sit there with their PJs and learn how to play with their
man,
Instagram.
I've got students at school that literally, um, and I'm not putting them down. It's just a whole different way of thinking. I mean, their idea of practicing is to like get some like Dream Theater lick and get the metronome out, and they actually compare, like, how fast do you play in that lick? Well, I've got it up to 180. Well, I've got it
Oh
up
my,
to 185. And I mean, that's their world. That's really how they
that's
view music, is sort of like an athletic thing. And it's weird to me because I never viewed music that way. I only learned fast stuff because I had to, because like some
sure.
song had fast parts in it that I had to learn. But I've never practiced on chops. It's not really been something that was that important to me. So I don't know.
Sure. No, I can relate to that. Um, Man, let's talk about the early days of tribal tech. And you guys, like, I'm assuming that was what, late 80s when you guys
Yeah,
formed?
I guess, yeah, like 85, 86, we made our first record.
85, 86. So how much van was like in those, were you guys like were touring like a rock band for a while, right?
Yeah, but not until we had about, I would say, let's see, there were the first three Tribal Tech albums, then there was four, then album number five, Illicit. That's when we
Mm-hmm.
started touring, because we couldn't
Mm.
before then we couldn't really get agents interested. It wasn't until we had five albums out and gained some popularity or notoriety or whatever that we could get an agent and actually booking us gigs in Europe and the States and
But
stuff.
in the beginning, you guys were like the way you made records. Was it like affiliated with like Varney or something like that, or?
Yeah, Varney was involved, but actually not at first. The first label that we did records for was called Passport Records. It's the same
Mm.
label that Players album is on, and the Jeff Berlin Champion album that I played on is on. And the way that happened is they had heard me play with Jeff Berlin, and they just said, if you ever have an album of your own music, give us a shout, and we'd like to hear it. And so uh, they did Spears and Dr. He, and the third album,
Mm-hmm.
I guess, was Nomad, and they did those records. And then later I got involved with Relativity Records for the Tribal Tech record. And
Mm-hmm.
yeah, and then I guess after that I got involved with Mike.
The thing that blows me away about what happened with, or like, is how the blues world, the machine of the blues world, seemed to have not, like, again, coming from a different country, Dog Party was really, I mean, I was young when it came out, it's, for me, it was really my bridge into being more interested in people like Stevie Ray Vaughan, which
Right,
might
right,
sound
right.
so strange to you, but
Yeah, of
but
course,
it,
because he's
but
so much a
it,
bigger name than me, you know.
well, it was such a backwards journey in a lot of ways. Like, I never would have gotten into like even listening to a lot of blues guys if it wasn't for your record, and you get such a skewed vision of the world. But like, did you guys ever try to just go mainstream blues with those kind of things and do those kind of gigs, those kind of festivals?
No, not really. I mean, there was at one point where I had a pretty bluesy band playing the Dog Party material, but we were
Mm-hmm.
pretty much booked on the same festivals and gigs that I was always booked in. I was just
Mm-hmm.
with a different band and playing different music, but the venues never really changed.
Mm.
Even
Yeah.
now I do blues festivals sometimes, and it's like, I guess they know I play some blues and they be open-minded to some other stuff too. But I get booked in so many different areas, like sometimes theaters, sometimes clubs, sometimes jazz festivals, sometimes blues festivals. Never really know what's going to hit me until I see the touring schedule.
Sure. Sure. So how much road is like do you do currently per year?
Wow, a lot. Um,
A lot, a
Probably
lot.
4 months a year.
Mm.
Yeah.
Is that a good amount for you, or you
Well,
wish it was
I
more or
mean,
less?
got a 15-year-old daughter and three dogs, so of course it's hard to leave home and but it's my job, so that's how I make
Sure.
money, is by touring and selling CDs. So that's what I do. So when
Yeah.
calls, I go.
So it seems like, and your main areas right now for touring would be like South America, Southeast Asia, and Europe, right?
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. States is pretty much history. I don't even consider going out in the States anymore because the
Well,
money's just not happening,
when did that happen? When did that start happening?
Oh God, 10 years ago or 15 years ago.
Like what, before that, it was just the same? Like, you would tour here, it would be the same kind of money, same kind of people as Europe,
Well,
or?
put it this way, 15 years ago or even 20 years ago, you could actually, our tribal tech had our own van and that we bought. And so that cut down the cost of having to rent a van every week. And we went out and we drove all over the country in the van. We didn't make that much money, but we didn't lose money. Now I know
Mhm.
that if I was to do that in the States, I would actually lose money because the gigs are
Sure.
not paying anything, so uh,
What do you think happened?
who knows? I mean, I just don't think there's enough jazz fans in the United States in the smaller cities to make it viable to go out and tour, at least for me, because
Mm.
I see other people doing it, and I'm not putting them down in any way because all power to them, but I don't think they're making much money doing it.
Sure.
And I'm
Sure.
supporting, my daughter's in private school. I got to make a certain amount of money to go on the road, and if I
Mm-hmm.
don't make that kind of money, I just won't go. So
Mm.
that's it. It's all about the money, man. It always has been. But
Sure.
but
It's work.
long ago, when I was didn't have a family or didn't have anyone to support but me, I was willing to
Mm-hmm.
go out on the road for peanuts and play. I didn't care. I just
Sure.
wanted to play. Now I've
Mm-hmm.
got the option of either going to Europe or Asia or South America for really good money, decent money,
Mm-hmm.
or uh, or playing in the States basically for free or possibly losing money. So I just can't.
Mm-hmm.
And I
Yeah,
miss.
yeah, yeah.
I love playing in the States. We have a lot of fans here, and I miss playing in a lot of the cities. But man, I mean, I don't think anybody expects me to go play for free,
No, but
and
of
that's
course.
what it would be if I went out in the States. I would either make nothing or I would lose money.
Mm. Yeah. Yeah, I can see that. How did the management situation change for you over, like, you guys started off, like, so you said you toured, you started touring around the fifth album with Tribal Tech. You
Mm-hmm.
started having like agencies interested in booking you,
Uh-huh.
and that lasted for like how long was that touring period? Like, I'm assuming you started touring then early 90s.
Yeah, yeah. Tribal Tech started touring very early '90s, like maybe '91, and we were constantly playing in Europe. We started getting invited to Asia and South America, and I've been pretty much touring nonstop since every year.
Mm.
With the almost,
Yeah.
so I've only been with two agents in my whole career. I was with Patrizio Chiozza, who was probably the main booker for like electric jazz, in
Mm-hmm.
all through the '90s. And then I got with Alejandro Oyala
Yeah.
and Alfonso Caprioni in Europe, and
Yeah.
Alfonso books Europe and Alejandro books Asia and South America. And then I got with Leo, who who's your
Yeah.
agent still, I'm sure, and he books me in Central America. And
Yeah.
yes, I mean I just count on these guys to get work, and they always do. So I'm lucky, I guess, that I have as much work as I have.
Yeah.
Considering
No,
the
it's
style of music I play is not mainstream at all.
sure. I mean, there's a lot of people who really got hit hard because of the. I was talking to Jonathan Kreisberg, and he was saying that he had a few years when he started his own label, right when people were kind of jumping ship on record labels
Hmm.
before Spotify, where he was just making tons of money.
Yeah,
And then Spotify came and just, made that business model non-viable, So
yeah,
the people that always kept the door open for touring, whether it's halfway across the world, and really kept feeding that, the fans, and people keep coming to shows wanting to hear new things. That seems to be like the only viable way to keep making a living in this business.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. So you have a new record coming out.
Yeah, we're actually starting the mix on Saturday.
That's
So
awesome. Is it all
yeah,
tracked?
should be out like July 1st. We're trying to get it out by.
What's
Mhm.
going to be the name of the album?
I don't want to say yet because
Okay.
it's too early, but my publicist is going to handle all that stuff when the
All
time
right.
coming.
I I heard about something that's so crazy to me. Is it true that you improvise solos, then relearn your solos with the right tone?
If I
Is
have
this
to, um, one of the things about the studio is that I have yet to see a studio in LA where I can crank my amp and get the tone I want without it bleeding into the drum mics.
mm,
Because I'm playing a 100-watt amp with a 4x12. That's my tone. I'm not going to
sure.
use a smaller amp just because I'm in a recording situation. So
Right.
I have to use my amp to get my tone, and I can't turn it up in the studio. The last time I did a record and used my speaker cabinet, my amp was on one the whole session,
Ooh.
and I didn't hear one. Not some of the auxiliary parts were fine, some popping and stuff like that, but the main melodies and solos, no way I could use that tone. It was really thin. I mean, the tubes probably weren't even warm, so so
Right.
so uh learning a whole solo is probably not something I would do because I always feel like I could probably make it better. But
Mm-hmm.
what I do have to do is, since the drummer plays to every single thing that I play, not necessarily copying it, but playing to it, I have to keep the rhythmic things that I played in the studio on the basic tracks very similar when I overdub a new solo. Or, if I really, really like what I played in the studio, yes, I will copy it, just play it again to get for tone. You know,
Mm-hmm.
um, I don't like to reamp. I don't believe in
Yeah.
reamping. I think it's actually bullshit myself because I think that the tone that you get while you're playing influences what you play. So when you take that and
Absolutely.
pump it into another amp, it never sounds right. The
Yeah.
inflections that you play with your fingers don't come out.
I absolutely agree. And I think that like the real way the test is in reality. Like how many records that you like have been reamped.
Yeah,
Like,
right.
in terms of guitar playing, like
Yeah.
zero.
I've even
You
got
know?
like some solos on the new record that I played uh during composing the song.
Mm.
I just laid down a solo first take and I just was never be able to come up with anything better. And that was on a Pandora, a Korg Pandora.
Mm-hmm.
And I thought, well, this isn't the best sounding tone. It's just a little Pandora. But when I tried to re-record it with my Marshall, the same solo, the inflections just were not happening. The amp just wasn't making those do what they needed to do. So I used the Pandora solos from the original
Mm.
composition sequences, and because the inflections and the what you're trying to say is more important than having the perfect tone, every time.
Hmm.
Uh,
What's the process like for recording for you? Like, how what do you what do you have to before you kind of present to your drummer and bassist?
well, I mean, I have to write the tune, and I do that with like MIDI bass and drums and actual audio guitar because a lot of my music involves, since I'm playing trio, a lot of the music involves open strings and voicings and stuff like that.
Sure.
And
Kind of
and
chord
so
soloy.
I'm recording the guitar audio and just MIDI bass and drums, and I write charts for the guys and give them the charts and the tune, and
Mm-hmm.
we rehearse. And of course, there's many, many sections in my music where the bass player doesn't have to play what's written. It's just sort of like more as a suggestion, and he can
Mm-hmm.
improvise. And of course, there are some lines that have to be played exactly to make the note sound right. There's lots of jamming sections where he can do what he wants. And then we go out and play the music on the road for a while, and then go into the studio and record it, live.
Hmm. Yeah.
And
And
then I get home, and then I overdub and layer. I'm really into layering. I'm a big
sure.
Jimmy Page fan, and you know, uh, Mike Landau, the way those guys make records, there's lots of auxiliary guitar parts of different colors.
Stuff hiding in the mix, yeah.
Yeah, sure, stuff that's way buried that you can barely hear, but it's there and it's kind of ambient. And I love doing that
That's
stuff. I love
that's the
working.
kind of stuff. Yeah, that's the kind of stuff that makes records survive repeat listening, and
Yeah, it's a different
there's
art
always.
form. It's not a live thing. You know, uh, not I haven't been criticized much, but there are those jazz purists that sort of have the belief that if a studio session should just be a live gig in the studio, and I'm for that. That's theater. If you want to do theater, that's fine, but that's like sort of saying you're not allowed to make movies. Actors can't
Sure.
one take because it's wrong.
Yeah, yeah. It's
you know,
bizarre kind of purism for sure.
I look at a record like a movie, and if you want to hear what I really sound like, go buy my live record. I have a live record, and it's got tons of mistakes in it. So if you like mistakes, you got my live shit.
Right. That's awesome. Did you ever make a record without a click track? What's your
Yeah,
feeling about that?
I definitely have, and it wasn't as easy, that's for sure. A lot of the tribal tech stuff was done without click.
Really?
Yeah, because it was tape,
Mm.
and we just didn't have a click. We just didn't use one because there was no reason to, because there's no bar lines or anything.
Sure.
So it wasn't until we started using, digital audio like Pro Tools, Digital Performer, that kind of stuff, where we found having click is great because you can copy and paste stuff from bar line to bar line, and makes it a lot easier. If it's a part that doesn't really have anything special about it, it's just like a chord sequence or something that doesn't really have to sound different every time. You just copy and paste,
Mm-hmm.
and stuff like that is much easier when you have bar lines.
Sure. Do you feel like there's anything lost? Like, when you hear like a Weather Report album and like all these tape albums. I mean, to me, it seems like there's something because of like things being so in time that like you might. Maybe it's just a different sound.
Well,
I don't know what's your
to tell you the
sentiment about
honest
it.
truth, even with bar lines, we tend to rush and drag all over the place. So
Everybody does.
I think just because you don't have a click. I'm sorry. I think that just because you have a click, it doesn't mean that you're not still human and don't rush and
Mm-hmm.
drag places and stuff. It's just that when you don't have a click, when you play a tune and the tempo of the song is completely different at the end than it was at the beginning, I'm not too into that.
Yeah, it's right.
Like,
Nobody is. Well, how
yeah,
forgiving are you with time? When it comes to like drums, like how often does it have to be for you to like go in and manually quantize some things on a record?
I never quantize drums. I leave the drum. I may like usually when we go in the studio, we do more than one take of a song,
Mm-hmm.
and I just choose the take that feels the best.
Yeah.
But I never go. But I never mess with the drums as far as quantizing. But I do mess with the bass like if I go in and a bass note is really late and it messes up the groove, then I will move it. You know what I
Yeah.
mean? But we're
Yeah.
talking about like something like over 20 milliseconds that you can really hear. You know,
Sure. I was
just
hanging out with Steve Rodby, and he did all the editing for the Matheny stuff. Like
mm-hmm,
even in the tape days, he did it with a razor, and he
uh-huh.
had like these like books of like stuff. I mean, I couldn't believe the amount of shit that was completely fixed. That because they played with like tracks basically with
Yeah,
like percussion loops, so it would make the drum sound wrong, like the same way that the
right.
relationship between your bass notes and your drummer is that
Yeah,
the drums would have that relationship with the percussion. So
yeah.
it was just every other note on everything.
Well, my way of doing it is the drums is the boss, and if the drums is early and are late, then the bass needs to be with the drums at least to a point where I'm lucky because my rhythm sections have always been really good musicians, and they tend to
Yeah.
really pretty much play in the pocket, and usually only have to fix a note here or a note there that was really late or really early. And like I said, if it's like somewhere in between, 5 milliseconds and 20 milliseconds, I usually leave it alone. But if it's over 20 milliseconds and you can really hear that it's a rush note or a drag note, and it makes the music lose the groove, then I'll fix it.
Yeah.
But it's not like I have to do that often. I do it way more often with my own shit. I'll play a phrase and I'll go, oh man, sometimes if I don't like the feel, I'll just replay it. It's a lot easier. But if I played something that's got a really cool tone that I can't replace, then I'll move a note here or there if I have to.
Yeah.
Because
Yeah. Slide.
sometimes I'm mainly recording for tone more than anything else.
Mm-hmm.
Even if I play a phrase and I don't really particularly like the notes as much as something maybe I could improve, but if the tone is like something really special and I know I could never get that tone again because the way I play something, I'm going to keep it.
Yeah.
I'm usually just recording with the number one in my mind being tone.
Sure. And
Because you know how when you pick every time you play a note on the guitar, especially chords, like to me a chord is like a snowflake. No two sound alike.
Of course.
And when you play a chord
Of
with distortion or with full distortion, to play a chord where you want the top note to be just a little bit louder than the rest of the notes, but you want all the other notes in the chord to be heard. And if you pick it too hard, it gets muddy. If you pick it too soft, it sounds wimpy. And you got to, usually I'll do like 5 or 6 takes and pick the best chords and comp them together for a really nice performance of that particular section. You know what I mean?
Sure. Yeah. You gotta have strong opinions about sound.
Yeah, some chords come out like you might play the chord perfectly, but if you pick it just a little bit too hard with your right hand with distortion, it's mud. And then other chords you might pick it with too much of the tips of your fingers and it comes out really trebly. And so I swear to God, I mean, I could record a chord 100 times and every one sounds different.
When did you think this kind of textural sonic awareness started like coming up in you? Because I mean, you used to play through rack stuff, like the most digital of digital gear.
Sure.
You were like a champion of that. Like how? I don't know. Did you like take some ayahuasca and like focus on sound one day?
Listening to other players whose tone was just simply way better than mine, and I started to realize that up until that realization, that my tone was pretty squirrely. It was thin, it was mid-range, and I started listening to guitar players, and I could name like about 20 guitar players who I just started listening to and going, wow, their tone is so much better than mine. Why? And I would find out because they're playing through way simpler gears, a guitar, a pedal, and an amp, a microphone. That's it. No process, no rack stuff, just really simple type of recording. And I started really getting into that, and I guess also being really influenced by Weatherport when I started doing trio recordings. Dog Party was straight ahead blues. Down House was pretty much straight ahead blues. But when I did Well with the Bone, that was my first kind of layered record. And I started getting into layered records. Like Mike, he made Well with the Bone. And I had been listening to some Landau, a lot of Led Zeppelin, and just hearing how those guys were using different mic placements and different guitar tones to complement each other. And I just really got into doing it. It was fun. Painting.
Yeah, it's real texturally rich.
Yeah, it's fun.
Thinking about things in a different kind of resolution.
I've heard your stuff, and man, you're great at that. I mean, you've come up with some beautiful sounds and textures on your records, and I really love what you do. It's just
really appreciate it.
yeah.
Yeah, it's funny. We went the other direction because our records kind of, we grew up in like we started touring in 2011. So, but the party was over like by years. I mean,
Uh-huh.
in terms of like money and like the states and all this stuff. And we made like these big sounding records coming off the bat where we were just sitting in the studio dreaming them up. And then we started getting more and more work touring. And it was very strange because we had an audience that really was into the way the band sounded. And we kept presenting them with these huge sounds that had nothing to do with what we sounded like live.
Uh-huh.
'Cause we were just a rock and slamming quartet.
Right.
And they just, and the more we started just making almost live in the studio kind of albums, the more our audience seemed to appreciate it. But and also like to have a budget for like making like a big sounding record is not a simple feat anymore.
Right.
You know.
Well, unless you're at home, and
Yeah.
which is what I'm doing, and the only way I'm able to make records like I'm making now is because I'm doing them at home, where there's no time constraints and there's no money flying out the window in a studio.
Sure, sure. But yeah, you gotta have the home setup to get the right kind of sounds at home.
Yes. Yeah.
Which you do. Yeah, dude. But I'm very much looking forward to listening to the next thing and what you came up with.
It's a fun record. I think it's a little more harmonic than Vibe Station. There's more chords, so it's probably less bluesy. But of course, there's blues every time I play a solo. I can't stop playing.
Of course.
What I do, but the music is a little more harmonic this time, and the bass drum play a bigger role in the song.
Yeah. And let me ask you this: like, you always what's your composition process like, writing tunes?
I don't really have one because I'm afraid that if I had one, I would start writing the
Same song.
Similar, yeah. Because sometimes I start with a drum groove, sometimes I start with a chord progression I like, sometimes I start with a fragment of a melody I like, sometimes I just jam into the computer and then come back and listen to it a couple days later, and I've done something by accident that I didn't even realize I did that I like, So there's just so many different ways to start. And then once I get something to start with, I'm pretty good at just sculpting it as I go into something. But it's that getting that first idea.
Yeah.
And I guess once I have that, it becomes a little easier.
The hardest thing about it is that, like, especially when you changes and harmony, and you have, you don't consider yourself a chop player, but when you have chops, the hard thing is that for something to stick, like a potential song of yours, it needs to have something about it, needs to feel new, and it's those things become rarer and rarer.
It is because for me, I've got like over 100 tunes out there and lots of records, like 22 records, and
sure.
Yeah, I tend to. You have to somehow use similar grooves because there's only so many grooves and so many tempos. So you've got to repeat elements of what you do. But when I look at every composer, they always, Wayne Shorter, Joe Zawinul, there's a vocabulary that each one of those composers has. And even though the songs are different, you still, each song is different from the other, you still find similar vocabulary in other songs. And I don't think that's a bad thing. That composer's identity.
Yeah.
It would be impossible to sound like 100 different composers for one guy to sound like 100 different composers. You're always going to sound like you. And
that's the big joke of it. People are into
Larry, and there's nothing wrong with your music sounding similar in certain areas, but of course you don't want to get too close. But I can listen to almost every song that I've done, and I can find similarities to other songs that I've done, even though maybe the listener wouldn't even hear them, but I hear them. I go, yeah, it's another song, and there's another 5/1, and there's another, single chord progression, and there's another half step movement, and that's a move I always, you notice those moves. Just like when you hear someone talk, you can recognize them, even though they're saying something completely different. You can recognize the tone of their voice, the way they speak. Um, you know, it's language.
Sure.
Everything we do is identifiable in some way.
Yeah. I mean, I gotta tell you, like with you specifically, the thing that I'm really grateful for you for that video you made, the second instructional video when you're wearing that pink shirt, you had that
Oh, the melodic
like curly
phrasing.
hair, the
Uh-huh.
melodic phrasing.
Yeah.
It hit me when I was so young in Israel, and I remember like watching that, and the one thing that really struck me was that in spite of the way that a lot of like educators around me were talking, it the thing that really came across is that there is a language that's okay to think about in jazz, right? It's and like that, the whole modal approach and really being aware rhythmically of what you're doing
Mm-hmm.
at every moment, and and thinking about harmony kind of in a very detailed way, because a lot of the environment now, especially in school, has this like almost pre-40s vibe where like everything's chord tones and it's like almost as if not even Wayne Shorter and those people happen, but like really pre bebop kind of, that's the way
Yeah. Well, I think
that
that's
people
what
think about
it goes back to what John Scofield said, that a lot of jazz has become kind of like classical music. There's a language of it, and if you don't play a lot of chromatic passing tones and play like Charlie Parker, it's not correct. But people like Wayne Shorter have totally proven that to be an incorrect way to think about it. Um,
hmm
Wayne Shorter has done so many different kinds of music and played these really minimalistic solos with just a few notes, but just the right note at the right place, very much like a blues player. And
hmm
jazz has become so diverse and so taken on so many forms that I never even think about it anymore. Where if my solo is more bebop oriented than a solo that's not bebop oriented, I'm just playing to fit the music. And
sure
I think that's every musician's main task or main job, is that whatever you play, it should be playing for the song, not to show
yeah
off, or not
hmm
to try to one up somebody else or show off your chops, but just to fit the song. And if the
hmm
song is fast, then I guess you have to play fast and show off your chops. But if the song's not, you know, I don't see a reason to, like, play stuff that doesn't fit the music.
Sure, I
So,
agree with that. I think the
yeah,
thing to me that always with your playing that really popped out was this real awareness of subdividing and like kind of really finding the subdivisions that have the right kind of momentum over a groove that pack a punch,
yeah,
and being like rhythmically very varied, but like certain players, and I think it's almost like an intuitive rhythmic thing, and you definitely have that, and like Michael Brecker has that, and Matheny has that to some extent. It's just when you're in, like, let's say that sextuplet kind of subdivision in a certain tempo that really drives that momentum of the solo. It's just, I don't know what it is, and that's the hardest thing to maybe explain to people that don't have it, but like the way you imagine your rhythmic vocabulary kind of hitting that groove, the way you place your notes just can either drive the solo or just not,
yeah.
and
Well, I mean, at least when my students ask me, and I do a lot of workshops and stuff, and when my students ask me, how did you get your rhythmic vocabulary, I tell them that just from memorizing solos and memorizing a lot of solos by great players. And the beauty of it is you don't even need your guitar. You can do it in the car. You can just listen to a solo and until you have memorized it and are able to sing it. Not sing it like Beyonce, but sing it like, you know,
in your yeah
rhythmically start and stop at the same time, and have your voice go up when the notes go up and go down, and sort of scat the solo along with it. And the more solos you memorize, the more the bigger your vocabulary gets. And
Well, yeah, but I think that's from my knowledge of people and students, and you're like we're coming up on like the question of real talent, and I think when you look at the big picture, the talent has a lot to do with seeing exactly what details make that picture work, rather than just appreciating the whole. I think people
well, I
might be
mean,
able to sing along to a solo without getting that punch, right?
I'm not totally disagreeing with you, but I have seen students of mine that had pretty much no rhythm ideas at all, and just by memorizing a lot of solos during a year,
Mm,
all of a sudden start playing completely differently. And like all of a sudden, like at the beginning, you would say, yeah, this guy has no talent. But then at the end of
mm,
the year, you see him really playing consciously great phrases and nice rhythms that they've learned just from memorizing a lot of solos. And then it sounds like somebody that does have talent. So I'm not saying some people are, you know, there are people that are more talented than others, of course, but I think it's something that can be learned.
sure.
Because like
Well,
I listened to myself, 20 years ago, and I didn't really have a great, super great rhythmic ideas. And I listened
wait,
to,
wait, wait.
uh,
20 years ago, those are the records that I'm listening to. You had it, man.
well, I don't know. I mean, I think anything I have, man, just comes from listening and learning from others.
Sure.
I, I listen and transcribe so many things from so many different musicians, and I think transcription and listening and memorizing solos rhythmically in your head. And the beauty of it is, like I say, you don't even need guitar player, and it's not instrument specific. Guitar players can learn from horn players, and horn players can learn from guitar
Sure.
players, and that rhythmic vocabulary is just out there for everybody to
Mhm.
learn, and it's such a big part of improvisation that it's surprising to me that it's not more emphasized in the way schools teach students.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's really not. It's beyond not emphasized. It's ignored. You
And
know.
I
It's
would
it.
say I would have to agree with you. It is basically ignored. I
I
mean,
mean.
all they think about is at schools is what's on the fretboard, you know,
Mhm.
and they don't really. I don't know how they expect you to learn phrasing, but I always tell any student that's involved in a school, don't think you're going to learn how to play music at a school because you're going to learn some things, but most great musicians have learned the majority of what they know from listening to the great players that came before them.
Mhm. Yeah, I remember in that melodic or in that phrasing video you made, like the thing with you were taking like just 16 flat lines and showing how to like just displace them. That
Right.
just opened like a whole world. I mean, later on for me, it was I studied with some percussionists and got really into like the Indian kind of soulfish stuff, which is just really thinking about subdivision, and they really made a nice little language out of it.
Yeah,
Um,
Laughlin is amazing at that.
sure, yeah, those those kind of dudes really ran
Oh
ran
my
far, but
God. His rhythmic thing is just insane. He's just
yeah,
such a brilliant
yeah,
rhythmic improviser. Brilliant.
yeah, yeah, keeps just kind of keeps open up. But yeah, that's where like all the options, because every harmonic thing you learn has like as many faces as you can execute, like in a subdivision, then displaced, and you know, like there's a great Stravinsky thing when he's asked about like what is music, and he says that like music is organized sound, you know,
Hmm.
and it's like the way he correlates, and sound is basically pitch and timbre. So, but the way he correlates it to English questions is that rhythm is when things happen, and pitch is what happens, and timbre is how it happens.
Hmm. Yeah,
And
that's a
it's
good
like,
way to put it. Yeah.
and like to study music without studying when to do things is so insane.
Well, yeah, I mean, it's just like studying a language and not studying how to phrase. You can't learn a language just by learning the words. You have to learn the phrases
Sure.
and how to speak, and you get that from listening to others. And it's the same
Right.
in music. You can't just learn a bunch of scales, and stuff and tools. You've got to listen to the people who use them in an artful way, in a meaningful way, and copy what they do, at least until you're able to do that yourself.
Hmm.
And
Yeah. Yeah, but in the question of talent, I mean, I would I would say that it's such a pain in the ass to get good that whoever is willing to go through it will just say that those people are the talented ones.
yeah, well, yeah, perseverance definitely has something to do with it. They say, like, there was this one writer that said the hardest thing about writing is the application of the ass to the chair.
Yeah, it's so true.
I think
I
that's
mean,
much true.
because there's so much self doubt and like
Yeah,
shitty days, and you
just
just gotta
gotta,
like
just
weather.
gotta persevere, man. I mean, I can't tell you how much music I've thrown in the trash. It's probably way more than I've ever used.
Oh, of
Some days
course,
you just don't come up with anything, and other days you're lucky and you come up with some great stuff that you like. And it's just a matter of perseverance. And as long as you're willing to sit there and wait for it to happen, it will happen. But you got to be
dude.
patient, and you got to be kind to yourself, and you just can't give up. And
There's an Israeli author, and you never heard this because he's Israeli, very famous in Israel. His name is Amos Oz, but he was working on a kibbutz, and he just became an author, and his thing made so much money for the kibbutz, which is basically a commune, that they let him like take a few days to write a week when other people were working the fields. But then they
uh-huh.
would all sit down in like the mass dining hall, and he said he had days where he wrote like 3 words and erased them, and he was sitting next to a guy that just worked the field for like 10 hours, and he felt like shit about himself because that
Yeah.
like, but then he said that his way of getting around it is that he imagined his job as a salesperson in a grocery store. And you
Hmm.
just get your ass there and you sit. And if clients come or don't come, is not your that's
No,
that's
I
not
mean,
up to
well,
you.
I have always, people have asked me, like, what inspires you to write a song, and I just say I refuse to let inspiration have anything to do with it. It's my
Oh,
job. It's
yeah,
like I wake
that's a
up in
good
the
way to
morning,
be.
and I go into the studio, and I sit my ass down, and whether I feel like writing or not, I do it. And I've come up with some of my best stuff when I was not in the mood to go sit in that chair. You know,
Yeah,
just
yeah,
it doesn't have anything to do with inspiration. It just has to do with having a work ethic and just going to work and getting something done. And sometimes
right.
it's really, really hard. I'm not saying that I don't enjoy it sometimes, but most of the time it's hard work. There was another writer that said something like, if you're enjoying the writing process, you're probably writing a piece of shit. Which I thought was good because those there's those rare days where you just sit down and you just hear what you want, and it just flows out, and it just happens, and you write a song in a day. And then there's those other times where just like you feel like you're doing a good job if you just write 4 measures a day. it's
Sure,
it's
sure.
pure drudgery, and it's really hard. uh, that's what makes me respect these guys like Mozart and Joe Zawinul. I mean, I sat there and watched Joe Zawinul just sit down and improvise songs. And I mean, this guy sits down for 5 minutes at the piano, and you've got Birdland. He
Yeah,
improvised
fucked up.
everything he ever wrote. He never had to say, like I mean, I asked him one time, I mean, Joe, you're actually telling me that you've never sat down and sort of said, like, should I use A minor seven, or, D sus, or C major seven? And he said, I've never made a decision like that in my life. You know, the
Dude,
process of
well, fuck
elimination
those people.
never enters his writing process. You know,
Yeah, that's
like
just
with
not
me,
worth
like you
mentioning.
got a melody note, and I say, okay, let's try F in the bass. Let's try F sharp in the bass. Let's try G in the bass. Let's try A flat in the bass. Let's try A in the bass, and just go up chromatically until I find a chord that I like over that melody note. And
Right.
process of elimination, I guess, is a big part of everybody's writing process, except there are those few geniuses that come along every 100 years or so that never need to use it. They just hear it and play it, and the tune is done in a matter of minutes.
Yeah, that's not worth
otherworldly.
mentioning though. Those kind of people, different kind of. If you really are like at a different kind of thing, then the systems don't apply.
Yeah. Well, those
just
people
enjoy what they put out.
You're probably not even from Earth.
Right. Dude, but that's I mean, I don't know. I can't imagine that I would take what I do too seriously if it came that easy.
Yeah. Well, for some people, I guess it does come really easy, and for some people like me, I have to work pretty hard to come up with stuff that I like. And I have lucky days and unlucky days, but no matter what, it's the process. And I'm so familiar by now with the process that I know some days are going to be great, and really I'm going to come up with stuff in a shorter length of time, and sometimes it's going to take me quite a long time to come up with something I like.
Sure. Well, I mean, another subject, like with your career, it seems like a great injustice, like a tragedy thing, but somebody that cares so much about tone. Like, you're playing in places where I'm guessing you have to like rent a Marshall and play with whatever cab.
Yeah, but I've actually had pretty good luck. They made an amp called a JCM 2000.
Okay.
And I always get cabinets with greenbacks, like vintage Marshall cabinets with greenbacks. And actually, they're making a new cabinet called the Marshall 1960 BX cab, which has greenbacks in it. And as long as I can get that Marshall JCM 2000 and cabinets with greenback, I've pretty much got my tone. It's not that different than the custom audio. It doesn't have quite as much gain, but I could just turn the distortion pedals up a tiny little bit more, and I managed to do okay with those Marshalls. And I saw Jeff Beck using one, and he got really nice tone, and I thought, well, I'm going to try one of those amps. I mean, I was using, usually I was renting JCM 900s, but I tried the 2000, and I was kind of like, it doesn't sound quite as good as my custom audio, but it does the job, and I can make it through a night no problem.
How are you getting your clean tone? Is it a channel switching thing or no?
Well, I never have a clean tone, so okay. I'm always
you're playing
like the crunch channel and turning my guitar down to get.
Okay.
Or cleaner.
Interesting. And every place has been able to provide them, like South America and Asia.
I found them in the deepest, darkest jungles of Brazil. I mean, Marshall they stopped making that amp in 2006, but they made literally, I guess, tens of thousands of them. You can find them everywhere. And that's amazing. Also says in my writer, like, we got really rock star in our writer, because when it's just on the writer in small print and they don't read it, but the first thing our writer says, giant bold print, and it says, disobeying the of this writer is the same as canceling the gig.
Yeah.
And it says what we need. We need 2 JCM 2000s. We need cabinets with greenbacks in perfect working conditions. If you don't get them, you will not play.
Will you not play?
Yeah, probably. Yeah.
Really?
Yeah.
So you show up and there's a deluxe. You're just turning around, going home.
Go right back to the hotel.
Really?
Yeah. Yeah, because I'm not going to play some shit gear and sound terrible, for my fans. I mean, if they're hiring us to come all the way over there and play, they got to get the gear. And the thing is this gear is easy to get. Every rental company has it. It's not hard to find. So, and I can absolutely say, since we've changed that 3 years ago with our print, I've never gone big.
Yeah.
Always have what I want, and I. It's not like I chose something that's really hard to find. That stuff is easy to find. If I can find it, I mean, you can't believe some obscure little place played and they found those amps. No problem.
Did you ever throw a fit, like had shitty tone and just couldn't do it? Has that ever happened
to me?
What? What'd you say?
Sounds like every night. Um, um, the room has so much to do with the tone, and very often, we play these clubs where there's no acoustic material. We're playing with concrete walls on the
Oh,
stage and
just
concrete
bouncing.
ceiling. We play a lot of clubs that just don't sound good. So I
Sure.
can't. But it's not the fault of the equipment; it's the fault of the room.
Mm.
And you just have to get through those nights and realize that. I mean, I know myself. I know I don't like the sound of my guitar. I don't play as well. And when I
Yeah.
love the sound of my guitar, I play really good every time. And because I'm so much into tone. And
Mm.
and and when my guitar sounds good to my ears, I always have a great playing night. When my tone sounds terrible to my ears, I usually don't play very good. And I realize that when I come off the stage and play, I realize
Right.
you did your best with what you had. And that's all
Yeah.
you can do.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Oh, that's good. Dude, Scott, I'm not going to eat up any more of your time. We're going to do this again when the record is out to promote it for everybody.
Well, I really appreciate it, Danny, and thank you so much for having me. And I'll be glad to come on the show again when the record comes out and talk about the record. That'll really help.
Yeah.
And man, I
Yeah,
really
dude.
appreciate it.
Well, we all are huge fans, so, keep rocking.
Thanks so much, man. It's good to
I'll talk
see
to
you.
you soon, Scott.
Okay,
You too.
take
Bye-bye.
care. Bye bye.